With their wrecked B-17 miles behind them, 5 American airmen huddle beneath a cluster of trees in Nazi-occupied France. They move only in darkness, sleeping in haystacks and abandoned barns. Each sound freezes them in place. A barking dog. Distant voices. German patrols sweep the area nightly, hunting down Allied flyers just like them. They glance nervously at village walls plastered with notices offering 10,000 francs for information about American airmen. Lieutenant Ralph Patton has heard whispers of an escape route. Help, but who to trust? Then it happens. A rustling sound. A small face peering from behind a tree. Patton locks eyes with a 12-year-old French boy. Before anyone can react, the child bolts, racing across the field toward the village. They cannot shoot. They can only watch as the boy disappears into the streets, carrying their secret to someone's doorstep. In minutes, someone will come for them. At 8:15 a.m. on January 5th, 1943, 23 B-17 flying fortresses from the 94th Bomb Group roared into the skies over England, headed for a Luftwaffe airfield near Mérignac, France. Among the crew was Second Lieutenant Ralph Patton, flying his 9th mission. As they crossed the channel, flak filled the sky. 2 bombers turned back. The rest, including Patton's, pushed on. The bombardier shouted, "Bombs away!" Explosions tore through the airfield below, but anti-aircraft fire met them in return. A direct hit shredded Patton's stabilizer, and his B-17 fought to stay airborne. For nearly 30 minutes, the crew battled to keep the damaged bomber aloft. Then came the Focke-Wulfs, 3 waves of them. 11 B-17s were lost that day. Patton's was one. The plane disintegrated mid-air over Brittany. Somehow, Patton survived, parachuting into enemy territory. He was 23 years old and utterly alone in a foreign land. He wouldn't stay that way for long. Soon his pilot, Glenn Johnson, and bombardier, Jack McGow, emerged from the wreckage. The 3 approached a farmhouse after much hesitation. The farmer, Désiré Géron, looked them over, risking everything by letting them in. He offered them soup, wine, and a fire. He then brought them to another man, Monsieur Denmark, who offered beds and a map. Spain was far, patrols were everywhere, but it was something. The Germans offered 10,000 francs for information on those hiding American airmen. Still, these farmers helped without hesitation. By night, the Americans walked. By day, they hid in haystacks and fields. On their second night, a barking dog betrayed them. A farmer investigated, and the airman whispered, "American, American." He returned with a grin and apple schnapps that burned like gasoline. More Americans appeared, waist gunner Isidore Viola and navigator Norm King. Though the protocols said to split up, fear kept them together. They narrowly avoided capture more than once, including by a gendarme who simply looked away and walked on. In Pleuray, another local hid them in a bistro cellar filled with barrels and the scent of wine. There, they were fed and warmed, brief comfort in occupied France. But they had been seen. As thousands of Allied aircraft hammered German targets day and night, more and more American and British flyers were being shot down over occupied Europe. Many bailed out safely, but survival meant more than a parachute. It meant avoiding the Gestapo. Behind enemy lines, the Shelbourne escape network was formed as a last lifeline for these men. Allied agents, French resistance fighters, and everyday people sick of watching the Germans take over their land, united to create a way of bringing these airmen home. Shelbourne was one of several escape lines, alongside the Pat and Comet lines. But it was unique in that it exfiltrated airmen by sea, pulling 135 men to safety alone in 1944. Run by Mi-9, and aided by the US MI6, Shelbourne operated under the noses of the Gestapo. German intelligence knew about these efforts, and they were ruthless in their countermeasures. English-speaking soldiers in stolen American uniforms posed as downed airmen to lure out those who helped them. Despite Patton's efforts to go unnoticed, a 12-year-old boy named Lucien Quillot spotted them. He ran to his teacher, Marie-Antoinette Piriou, to report 5 American airmen wandering through the village. Piriou, known as Tony, was thankfully part of Shelbourne. The daytime teacher, nighttime pilot extractor, was an elegant, commanding woman who spoke fluent English. She found Patton and his group hiding under some trees. She wasn't pleasant. She needed to evaluate them first. When McGough mentioned knowing Frank Green, a gunner she had helped escape a year earlier, Tony's demeanor shifted. "You men stay here. We'll be back tonight." She returned with several resistance fighters. They took the men to her schoolhouse, where she hid them for 5 weeks. Soon, complacency crept in. Patton even ventured into town just to glimpse at a German soldier. One night, incredibly, they all marched off to a party at the mayor's house, singing through the streets drunken like carefree Frenchmen. But the party would not last. As the Germans began to suspect the presence of Americans in the vicinity, the men were split up by the network. Patton and navigator Norm King were moved to the attic of Hotel Turnbride, barely avoiding detection when the Gestapo came to inspect the building. They were smuggled to a remote farmhouse owned by Lois and Baptiste Lenaour. One night, a truck rumbled into the Lenaour farm. The driver, Lacren, a local barber working with the resistance, had been instructed to pick up Patton, McGough, and the rest for the next phase of their journey. He'd already found McGough and was supposed to collect the others and rush them to the train station in Gorin. But the farm was remote, the directions were poor, and Lacren was late. By the time he finally reached the house, the train had already departed. Frustrated and out of options, he did the only thing he could. He took them home with him. Then, the man who was meant to move them forward on their escape now gave them much-needed haircuts, removing weeks of growth, grime, and tension. At the train station in Gowran, the airmen waited for a contact, a young man with a rolled newspaper. Their false identities were airtight. Patton was now René Paley, a mute voyageur. They boarded the train, which was filled with Wehrmacht troops. The Americans sat on the 6th cart, the one with fewer soldiers in random seats, pretending to sleep. Every stop was agony. The trip took 4 hours, but the slow, chaotic journey had one upside. No one checked papers at Guingamp. There, Patton and McGough were led to the home of the Laurents, just down the street from a German machine gun post. Patton felt the constant dread of capture every time he saw German soldiers marching on the street through the window. Soon, word came. The BBC broadcast the coded message, "Bonjour, tout le monde à la maison d'Alphonse." The extraction was on. François Quérambrun, a garage owner and secret courier, loaded the men into his truck. They picked up others along the way, 10 in total. Patton asked him, "Isn't this dangerous?" Quérambrun smiled. "The penalty is the same for 10 as for 1. At the Jiquel farmhouse, codenamed House of Alphonse, the one the BBC broadcast was referring to, 26 Americans, 1 French colonel, and a Canadian sergeant major gathered. The leader, Lucien Dumais, alias Captain Harrison, noticed something off. Why are there 26 men? We were expecting 24. The constant fear of betrayal that plagued the entire network became apparent when a paranoid Dumais drew his sidearm and pointed it at the 2 extra men, Patton and McGough. These 2 go back to England, with or without holes in their stomachs. Patton and McGow stumbled through answers about epaulets and ports of embarkation. Their nervousness betrayed no deception, only exhaustion. Dumais nodded, and he put down his weapon, saying, "Do exactly as you're told." At midnight, they climbed a narrow path down a 200-foot cliff to Bonaparte Beach. German batteries loomed nearby. The group waited in the cold, imagining shapes in the dark. Suddenly, the sky lit up with artillery fire. Patton's heart pounded. They were right there at the channel, and they were about to be blown to pieces by German artillery. But it was just a drill. The operation wasn't being targeted. At last, 5 small rowboats appeared. Each was manned by a British sailor. Patton was turned away from several, then, finally, a spot. Relief flooded him. Behind them, the French helpers quietly turned and climbed the cliff. Nearly 3 months had passed since the B-17 went down. Pilot Glenn Johnson, Viola, and King would escape the following night. Radio operator Ken Bly and navigator Milt Church had gone out a month earlier. Not one of Patton's crew ended up in a POW camp. They had all been saved by the Shelbourne escape line. Their transport, motor gunboat 503, raced across the channel shrouded by midnight. But the tension was not relieved yet, and a report came in. German E-boats were nearby. Patton felt a gripping fear take hold of him once more. But nothing happened. By dawn, Dartmouth emerged through the mist. They were safe. Patton and his men never returned to combat. They were too valuable. Their knowledge about the Shelbourne escape line and those risking their lives to keep it alive was too sensitive. As the Allies advanced through Europe, more flyers were rescued. The Shelbourne network, like others, quietly faded back into everyday life.